I want to start by talking about this article on the stress and coping perspective a little. So, you've read an article that I think offers a nice overview of this perspective. And you'll remember that this theoretical perspective suggests at its simplest that stress has a negative effect on health, but that not all sources of stress are the same. There are relatively abrupt, stressful events, and these are less harmful to health. And then there is the persistent type, the continuing problems, or what we'll call chronic stress. And your author points out that it's the chronic sources of stress that are what are most damaging for health. Those chronic sources of stress represent constant, chronic wear and tear on the body over time. And that experience of chronic stress, quote unquote, gets under the skin. That means we can actually trace our social experience. Let's say constant work family conflict, for example. And we can see that social experience manifest in our actual physiology. So we know from studies that chronic stress translates into chronic activation of the HPA axis, which has consequences for multiple organ systems. That chronic activation of the HPA axis results in wear and tear on the body over time. And that's one of the ways that chronic stress translates into poorer health outcomes. And you may have come across a similar discussion or a similar diagram in another class, probably a better diagram than the quick one I made here. And it may have been a physiology class or a psychology class. But here's what medical sociology adds to that. We want to take an upstream view of this pathway, right? We want to track back. Don't start at the stress. The stress is the risk factor. What puts you at risk of risks? What precedes the stress? We want to track back to the fundamental causes, the way that people have differential risk of stress, the way low SES or your race or other structural factors mean someone is exposed to higher stress. This is key for us in this class. Now, you just watched a video that demonstrated this pathway and the ways in which stress has consequences for your physiology. And they offered you some solutions for addressing stress at the end. What did you think of that video? And what did you think of the solutions? So I'm going to say that this video is clearly not made by a sociologist. Great job illustrating how the social experience of stress can affect physiological processes. Terrible job suggesting what to do about it. Where is the sociological imagination there? So as good medical sociologists, all of you, tell me how these recommendations might change if we were using the sociological imagination. And actually do it. Hit pause for a second, pull out a piece of paper, take some time to think it through for yourself, brainstorm how these recommendations might change if we were using the sociological imagination. Do it yourself. That's what produces deep learning. Okay, so I say that they're not using their sociological imagination in the video when they're proposing solutions, because they're only offering you individual level solutions to this problem of stress. So we know there are so many stressful experiences in society. And let me give you an example. Let's go back to that example of work-family conflict. Those of you that took Intro Soc may remember a concept, usually early in the semester, called cultural lag. And that concept suggests social change, such as technological change. It happens more rapidly than change in culture. So the cultural change lags behind the social change. Now, in the past, it was much more common for children to be in two-parent households and for only one parent to be in the workforce. Today, families look very different. It's very likely that in a two-parent household, both parents are in the workforce, not just one. And more children today are in one-parent households, and that single parent's very likely to be in the workforce. Those changes mean families are faced with greater stress around childcare issues than they were when only one parent was in the labor force. But we have cultural lag, where our social institutions, our workplaces, our schools, and our social policy haven't changed at the same pace as those shifts in family life. So even though parents are likely to be in the workforce, we don't have paid parental leave policies similar to other high-income countries, meaning parents often have to go back to work soon after a new child becomes part of their family. And even though technological change means we have the capacity to let people work remotely and have more flexible schedules that might make it easier to find work family balance, we weren't seeing much remote work prior to the pandemic. And then here's another major social shift: we parent our children differently today than in the past. Children are involved in far more formal, organized activities like sports teams and extracurricular clubs. So when a parent gets home from work, that may not translate into some leisurely evening at home. It may mean frantically running different kids to different events. It may mean leaving work early to get to a kid's game. So, this obviously means that these different factors parents are faced with are additional sources of stress for them today versus what they would have experienced in the past. Now, a sociologist named Annette Lareau studied extensively this new parenting strategy, and she named it concerted cultivation. That name came from the idea that in the past idea was that kids would just naturally develop, and the parent's job was to provide basic needs: food, shelter, safety, love. Today, it's those things plus a million. Now it's your job to make sure that your child is excelling on every front. They're your project to develop, and the way they develop isn't just a commentary on how they naturally were going to develop. It's a commentary on you and your performance as a parent. Um, and so Annette Lareau says what parents are expected to do today, providing this intensive parenting while also working full time in the labor force, that's unprecedented in history. That's something new, and that's stressful. So, the take home point here is that compared to life a century ago, a lot more is being expected of parents today, meaning work family conflict is higher than ever before, which means a potential source of chronic stress for a whole lot of families today. Now, in this video you watched, what is this video's solution for stress? Their solution that they're suggesting is exercise and meditation. And that's great. Let me say this up front, loud and clear. I certainly don't have a problem with either of those. They're fantastic. And I encourage you to do them both. But it's fascinating from a sociologist's perspective that our solution to the massive stress people are under in our society, maybe in our example from trying to balance work and family, but there are plenty of other examples of chronic stress. Our solution to that problem isn't to change social structures that are producing the stress, it's to tell individuals to exercise more and meditate. Society may have changed. You may face more chronic stress today than in the past. That's your problem, and that's your responsibility to deal with. That's all you get. Solely about individual level solutions. So, as you watch the end of this video and see these solutions, hopefully, as good medical sociologists, you're all asking, wait a minute, where are the macro level solutions? Why aren't we identifying anything about society as potentially to blame or as potentially to be remedied? Why can't workplaces be more accommodating for parents, especially new parents with babies? Why not a recognition that our substantial societal shift toward intensive parenting and intensive childhood involvement in organized activities, that has real cost for families? That lack of affordable childcare can just increase work family conflict? None of that here. Instead, it's your responsibility to fix it. Society may have turned up the dial of expectations on parents substantially, but you're just going to have to find a way to exercise and meditate more. And if you don't, all the scary things in this video are going to happen to you. Your brain's going to shrink and Alzheimer's disease. Terrifying. And go back and rewatch the last few minutes of the video. The video wraps up by saying, get in control of your stress before it takes control of you. Again, your job, 100% you. There's no mention here of any structural factors that might affect your ability to exercise or meditate. Who can afford that membership at the yoga studio? Who lives in neighborhoods where it's safe to exercise at all hours of the day? Who can afford the home gym or the expensive gym membership or someone to watch your kids while you work out? None of that's being mentioned here. just individual level solutions for stress, when in fact, stress is very structural. So let's go back to this idea that chronic stress is bad for your health, which is true. And chronic stress gets under the skin and causes physiological change. Also true. What a medical sociologist would add to this conversation that a medical doctor or a psychologist or people in other fields might not is to move away from individual level explanations and individual level solutions. They would ask us to look at broader social forces that are producing differences in stress. And then to tie this reading together with the idea of fundamental causes, the medical sociologist would say, we're never going to take care of the health consequences of chronic stress by suggesting proximate or downstream solutions like meditation and exercise. Sure, those are things people can use to help relieve stress, but they're stopgaps. What's really driving the chronic stress is much more fundamental. It's upstream, it's distal. So we need to look at structural explanations for why we're facing chronic stress. And we need to look at structural solutions for it too. And those are harder than just telling people to exercise and meditate.